Thanks to Aura for supporting our show. Go to aura.com/protection for a 14-day trial, plus a check of your data to see if your personal information has been leaked online. All for free.
Laura Ingraham, the night before Alex's testimony, is like the reason why his career ended, because she did a little thing, and it was Alan Dershowitz and her and John Yoo, and she accused Alex of being a traitor. Last year, we were at the airport, the Fort Lauderdale airport, and I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't think of her name, but it was Laura Ingraham. So he actually went over. She went to the bathroom and he waited outside. When she came out, and he was like, hey, you look familiar. And she was like, yeah, Fox News. And he said, oh yeah, I know who you are. And she was like, Colonel Vindman? And he said, yeah. She was like, I'm sorry, my hands are wet, but I really would like to shake your hand. I admire you. I'm like, what? And she was like, I know we tangled sometimes, but that's just the way it is. But I really admire you and thank you for your service. And you see that it's not real to them. None of this is real. And I just think the lack of authenticity from them is going to catch up. We don't see it in big ways, but I think a lot of people just are not buying what they're selling anymore.
Welcome to Future Hindsight, a podcast that takes big ideas about civic life and democracy and turns them into action items for you and me. I'm Mila Atmos. It's 2024, and the future of America is in your hands. Democracy is not a spectator sport, so we're here to bring you an independent perspective about the election this year and empower you to change the status quo. Today, we have a special guest on the show, Rachel Vindman. She's the co-host of the Suburban Women Problem and an outspoken critic of Trumpist Republicans. More than anything, Rachel has her finger on the pulse on all things politics for American women. We had her on the show in July of 2022, and we're so thrilled to have her back on. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for joining me again today.
Thank you for having me, Mila.
So when we last spoke, we talked about when everything changed for you, your first political ad, your husband Alex's testimony before Congress, abortion, and the Dobbs decision. It seemed like we could hardly keep up. But the world keeps turning, and so much continues to happen. So most notably, of course, Trump was convicted on 34 charges in late May. I was honestly surprised. It was not a hung jury. But what was that like for you when the jury announced its verdict? Did it feel cathartic?
It did. I mean, on a personal level, but also as an American, because we need some accountability. We need some faith in our systems again. And I don't think that was shared by everyone, but still enough people, I think, see that there is a path back to normalcy. And that is by holding people accountable. And no one is above the law, as everyone keeps saying. I mean, it's kind of become a trite expression, maybe, but it never should be. It should always resonate with us because this is the United States and it's a unique hallmark of democracies. And we have to amplify that and emphasize it.
Well, I think you said it right there just now, that it's a path back to normalcy. I mean, I think whatever the new normal, there will be not the old normal. We will find a different way. But it is a path, I agree. And yet, it looks unlikely that Trump will be booted from the ticket, right? With some exceptions, very few people are calling for the Republican Party to abandon this convicted felon as their presidential candidate. And so you are, of course, one of the co-hosts of the Suburban Women Problem podcast. What are suburban women saying about whether he should continue to be the Republican Party nominee?
I just don't think anyone thinks that's a reality. And as a woman, as a mom, I'm just kind of a get things done. And there's no use to live in fantasy land and fanciful thinking. And that just is not something we're probably going to accomplish in the next few months. So it is what it is. One thing I have said many times is we have to hire someone for a job. There are two candidates. That's it. I know that might not be the two candidates that everyone wants, but these are the people, and we have to choose one or the other. So we need to choose the best candidate because we didn't get a lot of applicants. Well, maybe we did, but these are the top, chosen by committee. And this is who the board is voting on, and we're the board. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I think that's very pragmatic, and voting is strategic, to remind everybody, not voting is not strategic. But I'm wondering what you feel here about the probable outcome, because in recent polls before the convictions, people have said in these polls that if Trump were to be found guilty, some of them would then actually not vote for him come election time. So what are your thoughts here? Because I do agree that will definitely change the calculus for some people. A convicted felon, should I really vote for this person when I'm by myself in the election booth? But will it be enough for him to lose? Because right now, I think the election will still be really close.
I agree with you. We know that the election will basically be settled in 6 states. If you are not in those 6 states, you should still absolutely vote. But it will come down to 6 key battleground states. And I suspect the Trump campaign has done private polling. This is a new thing to me, the world of private polling and how expansive it is. It's not really relying on people to answer their phones. They have much more calculated ways of getting answers to long form polling that gives a lot of information. And I say all that to say, I suspect the Trump campaign knew if he was convicted, it was going to be a problem for them, particularly in those battleground states. And we're not talking about big numbers. You're right, it's close. But the advantage of it being close is you don't have to peel off a lot of people. And if it were such an advantage to them to have a convicted felon as their candidate, they wouldn't be so upset. And they are very, very mad. So, I know it was told that he raised a lot of money. I'm not sure I buy it, but maybe he did. And it doesn't really matter if someone gives $30 million or $33, they still only get one vote. So if people are extra duper, super excited to vote for Trump, that's fine. It'll still count the same as my one vote for Joe Biden. And we can't mistake loudness, contrived, or real enthusiasm, though I do think enthusiasm is waning for Trump, and we've seen that for quite some time. It doesn't mean anything just because they're louder. So I do think this is going to have an impact. It's important that we remind people constantly that he's a convicted felon. Because, come on, Mila, we all know what that means. Back to the job interview analogy. If someone ticks on an application, they're a convicted felon, that's going to change things for the person looking at that application. That is no different. Even if some people think it's wrong, there will be enough people's pause and think about it when they go in that voting booth.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm thinking now about the college students who've been arrested in the protests recently. And for many of them, to have an arrest on their record, I know that you're not supposed to ask in job interviews whether you've ever been arrested, because what really matters is the outcome, right? Whether you're convicted or not. So, but some of these college students are freaking out because what if this is on their record and then they can't get this job that they have, been working toward. And here is a person who's running for president, and this person is convicted on 34 charges, not to mention the additional charges in other states.
Indeed.
I think you really articulated this well. At the end of the day, there's only one vote per person, even if that other person is really loud. So last time we spoke, which was a midterm year, you were active in relational organizing. So are you doing that this cycle too? And how's that working out? And if you're doing something different, what's different?
I still think relational organizing is the key to overcoming all the noise. There's a lot going on in the media. And I think it's important to remember that media is a business, just like any other business. We are a capitalist society. Everyone has to make money, and they're trying to figure out their path because their industry is changing. A lot of industries are changing. I think that's kind of the problem that we have in our country with a lot of people, because it's hard to accept change, myself included. But as the media, they give people what they want. Brian Stelter wrote a great book about Fox News called Network of Lies. And what I took away from that book was the reason the hosts, especially the evening hosts on Fox News, didn't want to talk about Biden winning, wanted to talk about stop the steal, voter machine fraud, et cetera, is because that's what their audience wanted. That was the product they wanted to buy. And when you look at it very pragmatically, that's what the media is doing. They are providing a product, and if people don't want to believe something or it's news they don't want to hear, a lot of times they just tune out. And I don't think that's always been the case, but it definitely is where we are now because there are a lot of options and you can just go to change the channel, buy a different newspaper, and in that you can find a different reality. It's not really reality, but a different version, a different interpretation. And the way around that in so many ways is relational organizing, because if you have a relationship with someone, you have rapport. There's a trust oftentimes. People come to me because they know Alex and I are informed and they ask questions. And I think we all do that, right? I mean, we go to an expert, someone we know, someone we trust. And that's what relational organizing is. So when you know something, you can bring it up in conversation. And depending on your audience and who you're talking to, you know what's important to them. And you bring it up in a way that's going to get their attention. And even if you don't change their mind right now, they can take what you said. They can go and verify it. They can think about it. But we know from research, and it's just common sense, that talking to people and trying to change minds that way for people you already know is a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I agree. It's really very different to have somebody face to face with you talking about what's real, what the reality is, and connecting those dots in a way that's very difficult if you're doing it online. Like you said, you can pick and choose your own adventure in a way, your own reality online. It's interesting because, like you said, this didn't used to be the case. I think when we were growing up, this was not an opportunity that we had. There were limited media sources, and there wasn't the same kind of enthusiasm for disinformation from these corners. So, of course, we're talking about the election, and we are hearing over and over again that democracy is at stake. But that is honestly really abstract. And I feel like losing rights, as long as it doesn't touch someone personally, it's not real. It doesn't feel like my life is unaffected. Life continues. I wake up in the morning, I have my coffee, I go to work. And I think also that a good analogy here is like, climate change. The villages that are flooded, though, that I see on TV are like in Pakistan. They're not next door. They're not here. And so as long as it doesn't affect me, it doesn't matter. But for you and your family, you were directly targeted by the convicted felon ex-president, and that's not a joke. So from your perspective, how would you describe what's at stake?
What's at stake is our future in the United States, I think. My husband and I have differing views on this. So we recently were on an episode of This American Life with Ira Glass, and he came to our house to interview us, and he interviewed Alex and I separately and kind of got a choose your own adventure situation. But it was our different interpretation. And I was born in the United States. I was a citizen since birth. My husband is a naturalized citizen who fled an authoritarian regime as a refugee. His perspective is very different. What I said to Ira Glass when he asked me if I would leave if Trump were reelected is I would consider it, because if Trump is reelected, this is no longer the country that gave my husband's family refuge from authoritarianism. It's no longer the country that my family has proudly served for generations. It's the place where that country once was. And maybe that's splitting hairs a bit, but when we read things like Project 2025, we hear Trump's own words, whether it's the recent Fox News interview or the Time magazine issue in which he said what he was going to do in a second term. He is telling us. And this is the part that we have to break through to people. We have to tell them what is being said because we're all busy. Like you said, it's not in front of your face. It's not something that you are going to encounter in the next several months. It's hard to focus on it. Look, I know things are not where you want it to be now, but if Trump is reelected, this is what he's saying he's going to do. Do you think that is going to help your situation? And those are the questions that we need to focus on asking people to get them to start thinking about this in a personal way. Because right now, we're in June with an election that's in November. There's a lot of time. But I think it's important to say, are these policies, which is what they're saying loud and clear, they want to do, and this is only what they're saying. I'm sure they're holding back on some things. Is this what you want? Is this going to help your family? Is this going to help your personal financial situation? Because good, bad, or indifferent, that's what people are thinking about. And that's fair because, again, that is everyday life.
You're talking about Project 2025 and the things that Trump himself says he's going to do. But a lot of people feel like he's not really going to do that. He's not going to really be able to pull that off. And going back to that analogy of like, oh, the flooding is in Pakistan, it doesn't affect me. Like, I haven't lost my rights yet, so whatever, it's going to be okay. And I think that's a really difficult thing to put yourself in that situation in the future where maybe this is going to happen or maybe not, right? So it's like, how do we connect that?
Some people are willing to roll the dice, if you will. My family doesn't have that luxury. I know that we will be targets. This American Life episode was about who will be the targets, whose lives will be affected. And it's hard to listen to those stories and even my own story, very difficult to hear. It is really hard for Americans to imagine that that could happen in the United States. But once upon a time, a little over 2 years ago, it was hard to believe that Roe v. Wade would fall and not everyone would have access to abortion care if they needed or wanted it. And then we saw in Alabama the attack on IVF. We hear senators like Marsha Blackburn saying that the Griswold decision, which protected married couples' rights to birth control, she thinks that was unconstitutional. And if we look at the makeup of the Supreme Court right now, if Griswold went to the Supreme Court, they would say the states get to choose if birth control is allowed and what the rules are. And this is real. This is what we need to talk about. I live in Florida now. What I find in talking to people is even a lot of young women are not aware of the restrictions on abortion. We have a 6-week abortion ban that went into effect on May 1st. We also are going to have a ballot measure in November. But since May 1st and the law went into effect, the closest state where women can receive abortion care is Virginia. And they have seen 10+% increase in patients seeking care. So it is hitting home, but people have to tell their stories. It can be your own personal experience or friends. There was a recent court case in Texas. I did an interview with a young woman named Amanda Zarowski, who had a very similar story to mine. She went into preterm labor and couldn't get the care she needed because it wasn't enough of an emergency. The doctors, the hospital, everyone was trying to figure out what they could do. In the end, she was septic twice. She almost lost her life. She did lose her fertility. And she and other people with similar stories sued the state of Texas. They won first. The state appealed, and they recently lost on appeal. And all they were saying was not trying to change the abortion laws, although that would be nice. But what they're really trying to do is clarify the laws so physicians know what to do, what is allowed. people think the laws are just protecting abortions, but that's not what's happening. Unfortunately, even though they know there are these holes in the laws, there's no appetite to change, to clarify things. And I think when you have a moment like that, you see what the real motivation is and isn't. It's not about saving babies by not allowing abortions, because they can fix those holes in the law. It's really about power and control. And as long as they can go back to their constituents and tell them they have these laws and they're saving people, that's all they care about. And they don't care about who the victims are. I really feel strongly about telling these stories, having people see what is happening, even for those who are pro-life. If they see these stories, they can see, wait a second, this is not what we want. Mm-hmm. But it's too many in the Republican Party right now. And I was once a Republican. I was raised a Republican. I grew up in Oklahoma. I mean, you don't really have a choice. I don't even have words for it. It's really hard for me. I don't know what motivates them, but I don't know why they're so okay with hurting people.
Yeah, it's a good question. I also wonder about when we talk about abortion rights having been lost and all these trigger laws having taken effect in these states that anticipated Roe falling, so that their trigger laws to outlaw abortion or restrict it even more if it had not been, if they don't have an outright ban on it, then, we wouldn't be in this mess. It just happened so quickly. It basically was like dominoes falling. And of course, like you said, Republicans continue to be on the attack. And to your point that the 6-week ban went into effect in Florida in May. So, people talk about it like, well, a Trump administration would be worse. But I don't know how it can be worse than it already is, because it's already happening, right? And this is happening under the Biden administration. Of course, granted, it's state by state. And so this has nothing to do with Biden. And he talks about codifying a national right to abortion, which of course is impossible in this moment with Congress. So when you talk to people, though, are people understanding that even if he were to win a second term, that it's also still unlikely that he could codify a national abortion law that protects our rights? How do you think about that? How do you talk about that?
Yeah, that's very true. My daughter is finishing her 7th grade year right now. And one thing we've tried to explain to her, maybe in the last couple of months, because she had one grade that got very bad. Now she's trying to dig herself out. But the concept is, when you dig yourself into a hole, it's a lot of work to get out of it. And that's true for us as well. We have dug quite a hole by not just electing Trump, but all the people around him. And you see so many that to him individually, they want to bear allegiance. But then in order to stay elected and maintain being elected, they feel like they have to deliver these really hard views. And so they're kind of two different people, because I don't think Trump really even has any strong beliefs. But how can he keep his base energized? And this is kind of where it's settled. And so that's who he's trying to appease. That's who they're trying to appease. Again, I think the support is waning, but it's still there. And that is their audience. I also think these people are incredibly out of touch. And a lot of Americans, especially independents and people in the middle, aren't buying it anymore. There are some people it's going to be impossible to change their minds. And I recommend actually not spending a lot of time on that. Unless you're just really close to someone and you often talk, I think it's still worth discussing. But going out of your way to have discussions with someone whose mind is never going to change is probably futile. But it's necessary to remind people what is happening now, and that it's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to be instant if Biden is reelected. But what we have, if Joe Biden is reelected, is an opportunity for democracy to wake up and fight another day. And we can only do that if we still have a democracy. And if you look at all the things that Trump wants to do, Project 2025, it is straight out of an authoritarian playbook. And honestly, the most recent Fox News interview that he did, he talked about so many things that the continued politicization and demeaning of the military. This is just authoritarianism 101. We have to make those connections for people. We have to draw the line. It is incumbent on us to do it. It's a lot of work, but this is what we've been given. This is the hole we have to get out of. And it is hard work. But listening to podcasts like yours and mine and getting information from good resources and then taking that out and sharing it with people who are not listening is so powerful. Do not underestimate it. It mattered in 2020, it mattered in 2022, and it is going to be a huge factor in this election in 2024.
Well said. Well said. We're taking a short break, and we'll be back with Rachel in just a moment. But first, doesn't it feel like there's a major leak of personal information just about every week? I'm sure you've read about the recent ones at major phone and healthcare companies. It's a scary thought that your information, your full legal name, email, home address, phone numbers, credit card info, and more, can all easily be found online. Data brokers can get your data legally from public tax records, credit card companies, cable and internet providers, and sell it to anyone who will buy it, even scammers. So what do? Aura is a great way to try out a great VPN. We're thrilled to partner with Aura, the all-in-one online safety solution that helps protect your information. Aura is offering you a 14-day trial plus a check of your data to see if your personal information has been leaked online, all for free when you visit aura.com/protection. And that's not all. Aura is a great tool that monitors identity theft, financial fraud, and other online threats before they happen. With Aura, you can rest easy knowing that someone is looking out for you. And it's really easy to use. Aura offers a suite of tools to protect you, including real-time alerts on suspicious activity, computer virus protection, a VPN, password manager, and even parental controls. It's a comprehensive online safety solution that provides almost every tool you'll ever need, all in one place. My favorite thing about Aura is how it helps reduce annoying robocalls, telemarketers, and junk mail by sending takedown requests on your behalf regularly. That's just a huge weight off my shoulders. And hey, if you're looking for a gift for someone in your family, this will be a unique one, and it will give them the protection they need online. I'm thinking about giving it to my brother. For a limited time, Aura is offering our audience, you, a 14-day trial plus a check of your data to see if your personal information has been leaked online, all for free when you visit aura.com/protection. That's aura.com/protection. Certain terms apply, so be sure to check the site for details. We also want to share about a podcast we think you'll enjoy called What Next?
Do you ever feel like there's nothing new in the news? You know there are urgent things happening in the world around you, but all you hear is noise. That's why we made What Next? Our goal is to tell you the stories you haven't heard before, or maybe a different side to the story you thought you already knew all about. I'm Mary Harris, the host of What Next? And I love my job because it helps me cut through the noise of the news. And then I get to bring it to you. Together, we can figure out what next.
And now, let's return to my conversation with Rachel Vindman. Well, we talked about Roe, Dobbs, digging yourself out of a hole. Yeah, actually, this is a great analogy, digging yourself out of a hole. And so, of course, in this context, we talked about the Supreme Court just briefly. But really, let's dig a little bit deeper here because it's really the Supreme Court that gave us Dobbs, and this ultra-conservative majority continues to wreak havoc with our rights. And like you said, they might undo Griswold. So I saw your tweet in response to Senator Durbin's post that Justice Alito must recuse himself from Trump versus U.S. and Fisher versus U.S., and you asked in the tweet if there's a plan beyond tweeting, and it definitely doesn't feel like it. Do you think, though, that voters are becoming more and more cognizant about the importance of the Supreme Court to our freedoms? And do you think that this will be a faction that will turn out in November?
Yes, I absolutely think that voters are seeing the Supreme Court in a completely different way, myself included. I am disappointed with senators like Senator Durbin, not in who he is and what he stands for, but the tactics. These are not normal times. I don't think normal times are coming back. When Joe Biden won in 2020, when the race was called for him, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in a very long time. But then January 6th happened, and I quickly realized we are never going back to business as usual. That ship has sailed. And the sooner we all accept that, the better. Even if President Biden wins re-election, things are not instantly going back to normal. We have a new normal, and we have to understand that and act accordingly. And that means throwing some punches. I know Michelle Obama famously said, "When they go low, we go high." I just don't buy it. I'll tell you a quick story. There was one night back when Tucker Carlson was still on Fox News, and we were eating dinner, and Alex got a phone call, and it said, like, Fox News was caller ID. He didn't answer it. And then a little bit later, he checked his email, and it was from a fact checker or researcher or something weird from Tucker Carlson show. "Hey, tomorrow we're going to run a story about you selling arms to Ukraine. What do you want to say about it?" Well, he didn't ever do anything like that. All that is highly regulated. It goes to the government. It was silly. But he screenshotted the email and put it on Twitter. And guess what? They never talked about it. Because you have to punch back if you are available to do it, or preemptively punch. And I don't especially like this either, but if I don't like it and I just decide not to be part of it, then I will be a victim. It's a very tough place. I struggle with this all the time. But our elected officials, like Senator Durbin, they have to fight for us. We kind of need to let them know at every opportunity that we expect more, that we want more. And that was my response to Senator Durbin. I think everyone should call their senators. They should let them know. And this is a very powerful tool, by the way. It only takes a few minutes, but it is absolutely worth it. Even if, you're in New York. I'm sure Senator Schumer agrees with you, or you agree with him on a lot of things, but he still needs to know what's important to you. That is a critical thing. I call my senators, crazy ones, because I live in Florida, I call them all the time, have pleasant conversations with their offices, and they're nice people. It's not scary.
Thanks for saying that. It's not scary.
Yeah. No, their staff is professional, and they're very nice. I haven't encountered anyone that's not. But if you want Supreme Court justices to recuse themselves, don't tweet about it. Have some teeth. You're a co-equal branch of government. Act like it.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
And if they're going to do this, you need to fight fire with fire.
Yes.
And this is, I think, where people get really frustrated. Isn't there something you can do? And I think there is.
Yes.
Get creative. I don't know what it is. I'm not an attorney, but we have a lot of smart people who can work on this. Find something. But doing nothing is just frustrating to everyone. And I think it leads to people kind of checking out of the whole process. And that is the last thing we need right now.
100%. 100%. I like your suggestion, of course, to contact your elected representative. We should be contacting our senators for sure on this to ask for the recusal of Justice Alito. And I think if we don't reach out, they don't know that it's important to us. I like to remind people that when we reach out to our elected representative, and even if you send an email, somebody tallies that at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. These are the issues that matter. You got so many emails on this, so many emails on that. Or if you make a phone call, like you said, they're professional. And, you don't have to be mean. You just tell them what you care about and what you want your elected representative to do on your behalf. And that's why you elected them.
I'm going to say something just on that is when we see states like Kansas, like Florida, Ohio, the reason why we have these ballot measures for abortion rights is because even in places with Republican supermajorities, they are not representing the will of the people. And that is why when they collect signatures, which is what was done in all those states, to put this as a ballot measure, it is because we have like kind of de facto minority rule. This is not what the people want. And that is why it's really important to let your voice be heard, because even if it's someone who's the same party as you and you agree with what they vote for most of the time, you still need to let them know what's important to you. And you're exactly right. They tally it, and the elected officials literally ask for that information. They want to know what's important.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think one of the things about you saying that we need to continue to be engaged is that we're all very tired. We're so tired since 2016. So tired. I feel like we're so tired for real this time, like with feeling. It used to feel really invigorating, right, to be involved and vote and talk about it. Now we're just so pooped, honestly. But nonetheless, there have been some important victories, like you said, in Ohio, ballot measures. And, for example, also for Justice Protasiewicz to win in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. But still, democracy at stake. And it feels like we're honestly doing this, like lurching from election to election, as opposed to doing the everyday work. And I really feel like that's not how we should be practicing democracy. That's not how we're going to save democracy. But since you talk to so many people and you have this podcast about suburban women, talking to suburban women, this is your audience. I'm really curious. How do you think about democracy, about doing the work, saving it, and how to communicate about it in your circles?
Well, first of all, I am tired also, and I get tired also. And then I think about people in places that don't have democracy. When we lived in Moscow, I was able to work at a Russian kindergarten that was definitely for elites. It was a very interesting experience, and it was bilingual, so I taught in English. And my Russian colleagues oftentimes would censor themselves. I didn't get it for a while. There were some things they wouldn't talk about because they were afraid someone was listening. And I think there were a lot of cameras in the kindergarten. They didn't trust that someone wouldn't take what they said, particularly to me as an American, and turn that in to someone. I don't know that this apparatus exists, but the fear was there that it existed. Again, that's a hard thing to draw for people, a line to draw for people. They won't relate to it. But when I get tired, I think of all those people in their lifetime. They could never imagine being able to speak freely like we do as Americans. So dig a little deeper, get over it, and just go do what you have to do. But I think it's important to acknowledge that we're tired of this and we still have to do that work. It is not particularly invigorating as it once was. But if you pick something that's important to you and you're talking about the issues that are most important to you, it's more genuine and it feels more natural. You can do it 30 seconds a day or 10 minutes a day. It doesn't have to be the only thing you do. But advocating for yourself is a form of self-care, and advocating for what's important to you in terms of politics and policy is a way to speak up for yourself.
Oh, totally agree. I want to do a small pivot here because Alex is obviously a Ukraine expert. You just mentioned living in Moscow, and the war in Ukraine grinds on. It has been basically a stalemate for some months now. With all else that's going on, people have stopped talking about it with the same urgency. And of course, in the meantime, Republicans in Congress balked at sending aid to Ukraine, though in the end, the package passed. And Biden recently approved the use of American weapons for targets within Russia. Do you think this will help move the needle for the Ukrainians to help them win? But really, why should it matter to Americans whether Ukraine wins or not?
I'll start with that part first. It should matter from a very practical standpoint, Vladimir Putin has revanchist dreams of recreating the Soviet Union, of having a multipolar world order, or maybe even bipolar world order, maybe Russia, China, US, Western Europe. In any event, he sees himself a major part of this. And right now, he's really not. But Ukraine drawing back in would be huge for him. He thought it would be a lot easier for him. And that clearly was not the case. We should care, because defeating him in Ukraine means we won't have to defeat him in Western Europe. And it's really a practical matter. In terms of the use of weapons into Russia itself, I think it signals a really big move and a big change. Alex has always been very, very hawkish. Russia is not going to use their nuclear weapons. And that's something he said from the very beginning. But he is very knowledgeable on Russian nuclear doctrine. So I think he can say that with confidence. I appreciate that people are cautious. But you do have to understand a little bit of the Eastern mindset. Russia likes to consider themselves being Western Europe, but they are very much not in the way they think and consider things, in particular Vladimir Putin. There is a very zero-sum game for them. So if they have more power, we have less power. And anytime there are limits on Ukraine from their Western partners and suppliers, they understand that that gives them more power. Because if something is not allowed, then they will exploit that at every opportunity. So we need to take that off the table so that they don't have anything to exploit. That said, the situation in Ukraine is not great. I do think they're holding on. They have heart that we've seen for 2.5 years. And I think they will continue to fight until, I don't know. I mean,
they don't really have a choice, actually.
They don't.
Right?
They
like
don't have a choice.
They're being
And
attacked,
they're not,
and what are they going to do? They have to defend themselves.
And they will continue to do so. But Europe understands, because they're right there. They know if Vladimir Putin gets Ukraine, even in a negotiation deal, if it goes to negotiations, they are next. 100%. They are next. And that is not hyperbolic at all. As long as Vladimir Putin is alive, his dreams, his goals will be much more than Ukraine. It will include the Eastern Bloc that was part of the Soviet Union. He wants it all back. And Europe uniquely understands that. And we're getting there. But, you know, my biggest criticism of the Biden administration would probably echo my husband's in just the handling of Ukraine. And they were just always hoping to get by with the least amount and cause the least amount of damage, not dig too big of a hole that they then have to repair. And that just was not the case, because that's not how Putin works. And people like Alex and other people just always knew that was going to be the case. But they wanted to try something else. And that's not necessarily bad. But at some point, you have to wake up to the reality. And I do think the administration has woken up to that reality.
Yeah, that's the good news. So you mentioned earlier that you were interviewed by Ira Glass, and you and Alex had different responses to what would happen if a second Trump administration were come to pass and you would be willing to consider moving. So I assume that Alex is not willing to consider moving.
He is not. He sees this country as, again, the country who took him in and gave his family refuge and opportunity. They arrived with nothing, as well as the country that he so proudly served and dedicated his life to serving. So I understand those feelings. And his brother is running for Congress in Virginia 7, Abigail Spanberger's seat. He's doing very well, certainly going to win the primary, and will have a tough battle with the Republican challenger. But, you know, assuming he wins, I think it's impractical that we would leave a country if his brother was serving in Congress. the safety of my family is certainly at the forefront in my mind. And I'm trying to do everything I can to fight for us, but also for American democracy, because that's how we're safe. Democracy is how we stay safe, making sure that I have a vote, that we all have votes, that it's heard. And again, you go back to hear Trump talking about that he should be able to have a third term. If he wins a second term, he should, because his first term didn't count. You hear all this ridiculousness. We have to believe it as true. Not having elections, I mean, who are we? We have to believe everything he's saying is true and possible and could come to pass, and that is the danger.
Yeah, thank you for putting it all out so clearly. What really matters, what's accurate, and what's real. So, in this election cycle, what are two things an everyday person can do to keep their heads above the water? Just to, to keep being able to do the work and practice democracy.
The number one thing is to make sure you're registered to vote, to make sure you know how to vote, and to have a plan to vote. And then make sure that all your friends are the same. There are a lot of apps. We used them in 2022, and they're becoming more popular now that you can help your friends see if they're registered. And when you figure out this process, if people are going to vote in person, and I am not a fan of voting in person on election day because anything could happen. I don't like to take anything to chance, but I voted absentee ballot for such a long time as a military spouse. So in Virginia, where we lived before, it was very easy early voting. But wherever you live, understand the rules, make a plan for yourself, and then help others. And the other thing we can do is to constantly do that relational organizing. Talk to people about what's going on. Make sure they know and understand. An example, we went to a holiday open house that one of our neighbors had, and their names are Bubba and Karen. They're total Trumpers, but they don't like DeSantis. So Bubba asked Alex, what do you do? I don't remember what his answer was, but he was like, oh, so you know all about that Hunter Biden fraud and whatever. And Alex said, well, actually, it's not exactly like that. And they had a very long and pleasant conversation. And since then, Beba has come and asked Alex about things that he's seen and heard. And I'm not saying he's changed his mind, but he's getting a different perspective. Take emotion out of it and giving your point of view. And again, you give it and they can take that wherever they want. But I find most people do think on it afterwards. I know when I have one of these encounters, I think about it afterwards. So staying informed yourself in whatever way you can, that's not too much, that's not going to overwhelm you. Because if you get overwhelmed and you just want to shut down, that's not going to help anyone. So find that happy medium. You can stay informed and you can go to your friends. Make sure your friends know you are someone that they can talk to in a reasonable and rational way, as judgment-free as possible, but they can come to you and you can give them the truth and have a reasonable conversation and productive conversation about it. And again, that's a form of relational organizing. And I think it's very, very powerful. And we have the data to prove that it is very powerful.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for these reminders. So last question. Looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
The American people. They continue to make me so hopeful. The number of people that still, 4.5 years later, come up to my husband in airports, in Florida, at restaurants, all over, and tell him thank you. People have not forgotten what our fundamental values are. And that makes me extremely hopeful for our future. I do think we are going to get beyond this, but it is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be without conflict and maybe some bigger flashpoints. We have to keep our eye on the goal, which is maintaining American democracy. And it might change because the world is changing. You have 2 young adult sons, you know this, and I just turned 50. So
happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope to be around for a lot longer, but this is the young people's world too. And they get to shape it as well. That's another thing that really excites me. Even when I might not agree with them about some of the ways they're using the voices, but that's part of growing up too, because I remember advocating and believing in things and not being as informed when I was a young adult. So they know the power in expressing their feelings and getting out there and sharing them and being with other people. And that's huge. So we're going to have to stop and listen to them. And that's humbling. Because as a mom of a teenager, I have a lot of opinions and I want to share them. But also, her world is a lot different than mine was when I was growing up. And I have to stop and listen. So the American people in general, but young people, really do give me hope. And I am so impressed by them. And I know that I will not like some of the choices they make, but that's what democracy, should it survive, is about. It is about making something for everyone, and everyone is not a 50-year-old suburban woman. So we all have to figure out how we are going to survive together. And I think it's the most beautiful, messy, loud process out there. And I am so proud to be part of it, and that we can still be moving forward. I have a Substack called Moving Forward, about moving forward together and which direction are we going to go in. And I just do not think that Americans want to take a step backwards. We want to keep moving towards progress. And that is where our future is.
Hear, hear. Democracy is a team sport. And I agree that American people are still motivated to be in this game. Thank you very much for joining me on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Rachel Vindman is the co-host of the Suburban Women Problem and an outspoken critic of Trumpist Republicans. Next week on Future Hindsight, we're joined by Robert Tsai. He's professor of law and law alumni scholar at Boston University. His most recent book is Demand the Impossible: One Lawyer's Pursuit of Equal Justice for All. That's next time on Future Hindsight. And before I go, first of all, thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode, you'll love what we have in store. Be sure to hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app, so you'll catch all of our upcoming episodes. Thank you. Oh, and please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It seems like a small thing, but it can make a huge difference for an independent show like ours. It's the main way other people can find out about the show. We really appreciate your help. Thank you. This episode was produced by Zach Travis and me. Until next time, stay engaged.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,